Well, it's time to let our kids head out to children's church this morning. We got 3.5 years old through 6. You guys can head out now as our workers are heading out too and upstairs. And if you want to grab your Bibles and turn in them to Daniel chapter 12, verses 5 through 13. We are now in the very last section of the book of Daniel, and we are going to be wrapping it up this morning. And as I was working on this final section and wrestling through the text this morning, I was reminded of a phrase that I used over and over and over again in my early years of youth ministry on Kodiak Island in rural Alaska with my kids in my youth group. And that was the phrase, 3 words, you'll find out. 3 words that serve a youth pastor very well. You'll find out. See, to the question, what game are we going to play tonight at youth group? The answer was, you'll find out. Summer break question, we'd get together every Friday and have an activity. What are we doing this Friday? The answer was, you'll find out. And to be honest, this answer was driven by 2 very different issues. Number 1, in my early years of ministry, this was way back in the 90s, I was very spontaneous. Maybe I just didn't plan very well. I like spontaneous. So often I didn't even know what we were going to do. We figured it out as we went along. But number 2, and more importantly, in my early years of youth ministry, I was more focused, I should say in my teens, were more focused on the event than they were on the relationships. They were more focused on the event than the relationships in the community that I was really trying to build in the event that we had. See, whether we were playing paintball, we were backpacking, we were barbecuing, sand surfing, I'll leave that up to you to figure out what that was, or playing ping pong in the basement of our tiny little church on a rainy day, everything was directed towards one goal. And that was to build a cohesive community and relational growth amongst a group of kids who really weren't that close to each other. See, over time, the great thing that happened was the answer, you'll find out, became something more to my youth group. Over time, it kind of became their own motto. Because it really stood the test of time, and it meant to mean over time that we might be doing the most insane or mundane thing when we get together. But we're going to do everything we can to enjoy each other while we're doing it. So you might be wondering at this point in time, what does this old youth pastor answer, you'll find out, have to do with this final section in Daniel chapter 12? Well, the correlation is simply this. Daniel has a significant question. He has a significant question, but instead of being told you'll find out, he's told you'll never find out. He's not promised he's going to learn anything more. You'll never find out, Daniel. You're not going to get the answer. The vision is sealed. But your hope of eternal joy is forever secure in the hands of God himself. So we kind of think of like what main idea is hanging over this final section this morning in the book of Daniel. I've put it this way. Don't obsess over everything you can't know about the end. See, I think when we started the book of Daniel, a lot of people were looking to get all the answers they were always hoping to have in the book of Daniel. And as we've gone through, we've gone like, I don't have all the answers. So don't obsess over everything you can't know about the end. Rather, make every effort to live every day of your life in simple, faith-filled obedience to God, no matter the cost. That's what we're going to see in the text this morning. So let's go to it. Daniel chapter 12, starting in verse 5. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, 2 others stood on this bank of the stream, and one on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, the messenger that he's been speaking throughout this time, How long? how long shall it be until the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the streams, and he raised his right hand and his left hand towards heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. I heard, but I didn't understand. And then I said, "Oh my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things?" And he said, Go. Go your ways, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. And from the time of the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. But go your way until the end, and you shall rest and stand in your allotted place at the end of days. The very last verse in the book of Daniel. Now, as we come to these final verses, we could approach them a couple different ways. That this morning, I've decided to look through the lens of God's promises. God's promises. Because I think as we look through this lens of promises, we see three key promises in this final section in the book of Daniel. And the first one is this: God's people will face a limited period of unprecedented persecution. Those go together. You make sure you don't miss it. A limited period of unprecedented persecution. See, as we first go to this text, it's kind of interesting that what we first see in these verses is the vision that began all the way back in chapter 11 is finally over. It's done. The revelation is complete. And the second thing that we see is that Daniel is not the only witness to this vision. Throughout this entire time, it's been Daniel and the messenger, Daniel and the messenger, Daniel and the messenger. And all of a sudden, we got these two other angels that show up out of nowhere, and they've been listening and watching the whole time. And before Daniel can utter a single word, one of the angels says, "How long? How long shall it be until the end of these wonders?" The angel is the one that asks the first question. Just think about that for a minute. The very beings that were created to serve in God's presence, to carry out his work in the world, and to fight against the fallen angels that follow Satan, do not know and do not understand God's end times plan apart from what he reveals. They don't have the inside track. They don't know anything more than we know. In fact, the angel appears to be so distressed by the vision that he blurts his question out the moment the vision stops. Like, he can't wait to get an answer, like, what in the world's going on? Yet the angel's inquiry presents us with a question. What does he mean by wonders? Wonders. I mean, does he mean the time of unparalleled distress in chapter 12, verse 1? Does he mean the surprising rise and the brutal rule of the end times Antichrist? Like, what is he focused on here in this question? Well, even though scholars are split on the answer to this issue, I think the messenger's answer points us back to the time of unparalleled distress in chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, I think we could rephrase his question, and it would sound something like this: how long will God's people have to suffer through and endure this horrific time of trouble at the hands of the Antichrist? How long are they going to have to endure it? This is horrible. How long are they going to have to endure it? We get to verse 7, and I heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand towards heaven, and he swore by him who lives forever that it would Pardon me, it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. Now, the really easy thing, and the thing that we often do, is we really quickly jump to time, times, and half a time, all the questions that revolve around that. But we can easily miss something that's very important in the text. And that's that the messenger, when he answers the question, he doesn't raise just one hand, he raises two hands in his answer. And that's important because the typical pattern of oath-taking throughout the Old Testament is raising one hand. They're not asked or required to raise two. He raises, normally it's one hand. But here, scholars point out that in raising two hands, it seems like a small detail, but the messenger is saying, what I'm revealing to you is in fact an utter certainty before the Lord. What I'm going to tell you is certain. And what's he promising? To the question, how long will God's people have to suffer through this horrific time of trouble at the hands of the Antichrist, that messenger promises three things about this period of suffering. Three things. The first is that it's going to be limited. It's going to be limited. It's going to be time, times, and half a time. We're going to find out a little bit more about that towards the end here. But for now, I'd like to point out that this phrase denotes a divinely restricted or limited period of time. It's a limited period of time in which God's people will face the ravages of this end times oppressor. And I say limited because throughout the book of Daniel, 7 has been the number of completeness. 7 has been the number of complete cycle. 7 is the whole number, and completeness, 3.5, isn't 7. It's a partial, it's a part. And it implies incompleteness or limitation. So that's the first thing that we see about this time period, is it is divinely limited. Number 2, the second thing that we see is it's going to be utterly devastating. The power of the holy people will be shattered during this time. Shattered. What this means is that there's going to come a point in history where it's going to look like darkness and the devil have really won the day. It'll look like it. It'll look like the Antichrist is unstoppable and he's going to rule forever. It's going to look like the church has been obliterated and wiped off the face of the earth. That's what it's going to look like. The power of the holy people will be shattered. Not restricted, not confined, not blunted, but it's going to be shattered. It's not good news. It's not encouraging news. Limitation, yes, but there is a true shattering. We saw this earlier last week in Revelation 13, but let's go to verse 9 and 10. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. Speaking about this very time. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. And then here's the follow-up. Here's a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. There's not a promise of deliverance. There's not a promise of a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's saying it's going to be a horrific time, and it's a time that calls for endurance and faith. You know, this isn't what we want to hear. But I think this is what the Bible's telling us is going to be the experience of the church sometime in the future. There's some places in the world it's their experience today. But as we think of this final time, if we happen to be the ones who go through it, I don't know, I'm not making any promises, I don't know. We can find hope and comfort in the messenger's promise here in Daniel, that it will not only be a limited period of time, But there's even better promise than limited. It's never going to be repeated again. Never to be repeated again. Let's go back to the text. When the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things are going to be finished. It's going to be finished. It's going to be done. It's going to be over. It's never going to be repeated again. The shattering, it will come to end. It's not going to last forever, but even more, when it happens and when it's over, it's over. See, and that's an important point, because what have we seen all the way through chapter 11 has been these cycles of rulers coming to power and conquering and battling back and forth. It's over. It's over. It's never going to happen again, because God himself has set a limit on his people's distress. But as we continue reading, God doesn't just promise to limit his people's distress during the reign of the Antichrist. He actually promises that his people will be able to recognize the time of the end when it arrives. This is the second promise. God's people are going to be able to recognize the time of the end when it arrives. Chapter 12, verses 8 through 10. I heard this. Daniel is now speaking, but I did not understand. Then I said, "Oh my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things?" And he said, "Daniel, go your way, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand." You know, when it comes to all these conversations about end times, I know it's easy. It's really easy to get frustrated because there's all these different views and they don't align with each other. And so many times Christians are just kind of like, I'm just trying to figure out which one I really am and what I believe and what I understand. And I know that probably some of you have spent like a lot of time at one point in your life looking through all of these things, and maybe you're still struggling to understand. Like I did a bunch of work and I'm still not quite sure. Well, as we read the messenger's response to Daniel, I think this frustration that we can often feel is part of God's sovereign plan until the time of the end arrives. We're not supposed to know everything. There's things we can know, but we're not going to know everything. I mean, just think about it. Daniel, of all people to not understand and to not know and to not get an answer, who is the one person in this book who has received answers to the visions? Daniel. Who's been able to interpret things that nobody else can interpret? It's Daniel. When Daniel goes to God in prayer asking what does something mean, Daniel gets an answer. But when it comes to this, Daniel doesn't get an answer. No, he presses in for greater clarity, and he gets this answer: "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end." The answer is not "you'll find out," it's "you'll never find out." But thankfully the messenger he doesn't stop here with Daniel. He actually pursues on in what he gives in Revelation for those who follow. He discloses a few more details about the people and the timing of the end. Verse 10. "Many people shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand." So let's begin with the people. Two things I think we've seen here: people and timing. What does the messenger reveal about the people? He reveals that the humanity throughout the history of the world is going to carry on like it always has. All the way out to the very end of history, humans are going to carry on. Two different groups of people with two eternal destinies. Two groups of people. The many who are purified and made white, and the wicked who will continue to act wickedly. Now, when I came to this, I kind of got stumped for a while, and I just couldn't stop but and move on, because I had a question like, what does it mean by many? I mean, just think about it. Many are going to be made white. Many are going to be purified. And if you think about it, when you read through your Bible, are we made promises that like many people are going to come to faith? Many people are going to follow Jesus? I mean, when the Bible talks about God's people, it typically describes them as the remnant. It describes them as the few, not the many. Isaiah 10:20 through 22. In that day, the remnant of Israel and the survivors of the house of Jacob, this is after exile, will no more lean on him who struck them, but will lean on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel in truth. A remnant will return. A remnant of Jacob to the mighty God. So out of all of the people, only a remnant return. We go to the New Testament. What does Jesus have to tell us? Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7. Enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it are many. Who are the many according to Jesus? Those who enter the wide gate, those who go to destruction. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those that find it are few. See, this is what hung me up. The many, when God's people are typically talked about as the few. So why does the messenger refer to God's people here as the many? The many. Well, as I wrestled with this, one of the things I did is I pursued this question through a monumental pile of commentaries, and guess how many people decided to pick up the question? Nobody. Nobody decided to pick up the question on the many. And I was like, well, okay, I'm not ready to stop yet, so I kept wrestling with it. And so I'd like to propose an answer that aligns with the statement about the few. I think there's some things or the many. Number one, thinking about the many in this text. Given that the many, we're told, purify themselves and make them white and are refined. It seems reasonable to propose that the many Christians that we're talking about are actually the people of God, the Christians who are going to go through this future reign of the Antichrist and be martyred for their faithfulness to Christ. I think the many here is referring to martyrs. And I get this because if we go back to Daniel 11:35, which pointed forward to Antiochus Epiphanes, who's really the template for the end times Antichrist, what did we see about the Jews who went through the reign of Antiochus? We're told that they're going to be purified and cleansed and refined, the very same thing. Those people that went through it, purified, cleansed, and refined. And what was it about them that brought that purity and cleansing and refinement? It was going through that time of intense persecution in which many of them were put to death for their faithfulness to God. So I think on one hand we're talking about the many who are going to be persecuted and martyred. And number two, speaking about the many, I think we're being told that many Christians are going to understand aspects of this vision that Daniel himself cannot understand. Many are going to understand. Meaning really the timing and interpretation of verses 11 and 12. We get to 11 and 12. And from the time of the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. Now, a number of scholars, normally liberal scholars, would like to tell us that these final verses in the book of Daniel are referring to the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes in 170 BC. I mean, after all, he not only took away the regular burnt offering, he sacrificed a pig on the altar, and he placed a statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies. And even more, they point to this most likely being Antiochus because his reign of terror over Israel was roughly 3.5 years. Not perfectly, but roughly 3.5 years. So that fits with the time, times, and half a time if we're thinking times or years. And not everybody agrees on that part either. But I really don't think this is pointing us to Antiochus. I don't think it's pointing us back to Antiochus because it just doesn't align very well with the messenger's description of this end times ruler that we've seen starting in chapter 11, verse 36. It doesn't seem to make sense when we recognize that he's just been talking about this end times period of trouble in chapter 12, verse 1, and promise of resurrection in chapter 12, verse 2. Like why would we go all the way from resurrection back to Antiochus? Simply put, Antiochus doesn't seem to line up with these verses. Which is why I believe the messenger is talking about, at the end, he's still focused on this end times king who's going to come. We see it first of all in Daniel 11:36. The king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall come. In fact, Jesus seems to think the very same thing, that this is pointing towards this end times ruler as we go to Mark 13, because Jesus says, and when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not, okay, Jesus is well after Antiochus Epiphanes, and Jesus still thinks this hasn't happened yet. Let the reader understand. Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. In fact, something that's important to point out here in this passage in Mark chapter 13, verse 14, is that Jesus is actually telling us that whatever this abomination of desolation is, it's a person, not just a thing. Because we look at the text, he says, when you see it standing where he ought not to be, it's a personal pronoun. It's not an it, it's a he. In other words, this abomination is a person who will appear sometime in the future after Jesus completes his earthly ministry. So here in these final verses, he's still focused on the end. In fact, it seems reasonable to conclude that this is also the same event that Paul is talking about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, starting verse 3. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come. He's talking about the return of Jesus Christ unless the rebellion comes first. And the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. So all that to say is I think here at the end, just in case we're wondering, abomination of desolation, we're here at the end. He's not answering Daniel's questions, but he's giving us a few more answers. Like we haven't changed. Like the last number of weeks, we've been on this end times period. We're still there. And since we're still there looking forward, this 1,290 days, what does it denote? It's really a period in which true worship will be forbidden. Believers will be imprisoned or put to death for refusing to worship the Antichrist. If we run the numbers and we do the math, 1,290 days comes out to be roughly 3.5 years. And there's lots of questions. Mark, is this a symbolic time? Is this a literal time of 3.5 years? We're not sure. Some would say absolutely it's 3.5 years. Others would have questions. But what we do know is it's held by God. But if this is the case, why are we being given? After being given this, we have time times half a time aligning with this 1,290 days. So they're both referring to roughly the same thing, the limited period of time, 3.5 years. Why in the world are we getting this 1,335 days at the end? I mean, Daniel has not been an easy book, and it does not end on an easy note. I mean, it's like there's some books that end for a preacher with this great, like, yes, these are the final verses to end on. And this is like, I got so many more questions as I'm ending the series, okay? So it feels even off balance. So what are we doing with this 1335? Well, if we do the math, the most basic thing that we notice is that they are greater than 1290. Everybody got that right? Okay, all right, we're following. And they're greater by 45 days, okay? So 45 days longer than the 1290 days. So far, okay, we're together, right? What are we supposed to do with this? I think that if we kind of take the simplest approach, why are these people going to be blessed? Waiting to the 1335 days arrive. They're going to be blessed because they've persevered through and they've outlasted the 1290 days of persecution. They didn't abandon their faith. They didn't worship the beast. They remained faithful no matter the cost. That's the blessing. They've actually gone through the whole thing. See, what I want you to see in these numbers is that God is telling his people that a future generation of Christians will have to endure an intense period of tribulation, during which they will be pressured to abandon their faith and participate in false worship. Future. But when that time comes, God's people will be able to find hope in the promise that they will know what to do and they're going to know how to live. He's not going to leave them alone. He's not going to leave them in this place where they don't know what to do. They're going to see things. There's going to be clarity in Daniel that's not as clear to us. And when that time comes, they're going to persevere in faithful obedience no matter the cost. They're going to do it. They're going to see Christians being persecuted. They're going to see Christians being martyred for their faith. And what we see in this promise of this 1335 is God's note that while many will be persecuted, many will be put to death, there are going to be some Christians that go through the entire period of time in faithfulness until Jesus returns. They're going to be the ones on earth who are part of the welcoming party, who are still alive at the return of Jesus Christ. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 15. For this we declare to you by a word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep, those who have died. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and who are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Notice, what do we see in these verses? We see the very same encouragement that Daniel is going to receive in verse 13 at the very end of this book. God's people are going to receive everything that God has promised. That's the third thing that we see. God's people are going to receive everything that God has promised. Whether we die thousands of years before Jesus returns like Daniel, or whether we happen to be those people who persevere through this period at the end times, no matter which group of people are being addressed, they're going to receive everything that God has promised. Verse 13, but go your way till the end, and you shall rest, and you shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. See, I think we see two things in this very final verse, two ways that Daniel's supposed to respond to the things that he will never know. Two things. Number one, the first thing that Daniel's called to do is to continue walking in faithful obedience before the Lord until the end of his life. Continue doing what you've been doing, Daniel. Go on until the end. The end here is not the end of time. He's already been told that he's not going to be alive when that happens. He's talking the end of his life. Go on to the end. I mean, just think about it. Daniel's probably in his 80s. And for everything that we know about Daniel, like he never returned to resettle in Jerusalem to see the temple rebuilt. He didn't get to participate in any of that. For everything we know, he died in exile. He died in the land that he'd lived in since he was a kid. So he didn't get to see it. So in other words, the angel's saying, Daniel, go back to your desk. Go back to your filing cabinet. Finish your day's work. Continue to live quietly. Continue to work with your own hands as you faithfully serve your Persian employer, King Cyrus. Go on with your life, Daniel. These things are going to happen, but your call is to walk faithfully today in the things that God has given you today. Your focus needs to be today. That's the first thing. The second thing he's told is that he needs to live every day of his life in the confident hope that his future is forever secure. Daniel, your future is secure. Well, whenever that time of the end comes, Daniel, you are going to stand in your allotted place at the end of days. Daniel dies. He dies outside of the promised land, but his death was not going to be the end, is what he's being told. No. At the right time, at the time of the end, he was going to be raised, Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. And he's going to be able to enjoy his allotted place in the resurrection age of everlasting joy. Those are promises that we need. We need an exhortation. Continue to live your life in everyday faithfulness no matter what you're doing and what place you find yourself in this world, and also keep your hope anchored in God, knowing that God delivers everything that he's promised. That's how this book is coming to an end. In fact, as we think about what Daniel's being told, it seems very similar to what we actually shared together in our affirmation today from 1 Peter chapter 3. Chapter 1, verse 3. When Peter says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he caused us to be born again into a living hope through the resurrection of the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable and undefiled and unfading, kept in heaven for you." Speaking of you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation that is ready to be revealed in this last time. What's being kept for you and me? Our inheritance. What can touch our inheritance? Nothing. Imperishable, undefiled, unfading. But yet, as we look at our own lives and we look at the weakness, we look at our indwelling sin, and maybe even once in a while, our minds drift to what imaginable requirements it will be to persevere in faith through this time that God has called the tribulation. To know that God guards us through faith. He doesn't just keep our inheritance. He keeps us from falling away. That's the promise. By his power, he guards us through faith. And what does that really mean? It doesn't mean that he puts a force field around you. but it means that when your faith is at its weakest, when it's like that little candle that's just got that smolder and that little tiny bit of orange on the tip of the wick, and it looks like it's ready to go out, God doesn't let it go out. When that faith is just ready to go away and vaporize, God keeps our faith going. He holds on to us. That's the security we have. A continuing faith that keeps us to the end. So the question that we keep asking every week, and we have to in a book like Daniel, as we talk about prophecies and visions of the end, what does it matter to me today? How can these verses help me as a Christian today? Because I don't see an end times Antichrist. I'm not hearing angelic visions. How am I supposed to respond? I mean, after all, we are broken, sinful Christians, saved by grace, and we're living in a broken and sinful world. I think we can see 4 responses in this text this morning as we close. 4 ways to respond. This text and broadly to the book of Daniel. Number 1, we need to embrace our call as Christians to be faithful in the present. Faithfulness isn't something that gets reserved for hard times. Perseverance isn't something that we look to engage in only when it's hard. No, it happens every day of our life when times are easy and the seas are calm, life is good and bank accounts are full, job hours are good, families doing well, no sicknesses. Those are the times that we need to be remaining faithful, as well as the hard times. Trusting and obeying God in all things. Persevering in good works, not growing weary in doing what is right. Refusing to bow down and pursue the latest idol of our world because we love and worship Jesus Christ as our greatest treasure. Faithful today. Faithfulness in the hard times will only happen when we are being faithful in the small things today. So that's number 1. Number 2, we need to find comfort in the sovereignty of God over the history of men. I mean, if there's any time to not feel very comfortable and to not be sure of the world, now is kind of one of those times, isn't it? We look at our elections and we look at what's going on over in Israel and Ukraine and things going on with China and Taiwan and everything else that's going on. We're like this is not a really encouraging time to live in, and there's reasons that we can have for all kinds of fear. But we need to find comfort in the sovereignty of God over the history of men. And to know that his sovereignty, it's good and it's purposeful, and that it guarantees that our present sufferings are never in vain. Our present sufferings are never in vain. Number 3, we need to find something that I think that we often forget to even pay attention to as Christians in this modern age. We need to find joyful purpose in the amazing inheritance that God has set before us. God has set glory before us. He set glory before us. And it's supposed to be a motivator. We're not only supposed to look back at the cross all the time. We need the cross. We have nothing without the cross, but we're not meant to live our Christian life looking in the rearview mirror, but looking forward to what God has in front of us. Pursuing his promises. Just think about what are we told in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2? Jesus endured the agonies of the cross, everything that he faced in his life for the joy that was set before him. The joy was not the cross. Joy was after the cross. And that's the kind of perspective the writer of Hebrews is trying to get his audience to take. And it's the kind of perspective that we need to adopt as modern American Christians, because we live in a culture that doesn't want to do hard things for something that's out there as a better thing. We want life easy. We want it like no problems now. See, we need to recognize that we're called to endure lesser agonies than Jesus will ever face. We're called to endure all those things with our eyes firmly fixed on the greater joys that wait us well. There's greater joys that are waiting us in eternity. And finally, we need to remember that the primary description of God's people in God's word is that of martyr, not victorious crusader who's going to save the world, especially the New Testament. We're martyrs. The essence of that word martyr is witness. It's witness. And who's the Savior? The Savior constantly is not us, it's Jesus. But in the meantime, what does that mean that our task is? If our task is that of being a martyr, and we're not living in the end times, we're not worried about getting put to death for following Jesus, there's a present day response. Our task as martyrs is simply this: to live every day of our life in simple, faith-filled obedience to God, no matter the cost. That's the call. And what does that look like? It means bearing witness to his goodness and his grace. Whether that be through our verbal witness, or it be through our evident sufferings. The world sees and it hears on both accounts. The world hears our words, but the world also bears witness to our sufferings that are in light of the gospel and for the glory of Jesus Christ. They give credibility to the faith that we profess. This is how we respond to these verses and this entire book. We live in a promise that we need to constantly come back to. The kingdoms of men will rise and fall, but the kingdom of God will stand forever. Let's close in a word of prayer.